Several books lying at home I came across is Suraiya's Juggling Act. The Time of Group, the Times Group Books presents Suraiya's Juggling Act. So there are in the foreword he writes, humor writing is one of the most difficult things to do. Veteran humorist Suraiya says that he sticks to two basic rules. The first is and this is the foreword is given by Shabana Azmi. Uh, he sticks to two basic rules. The first is start off by laughing at yourself, then you can laugh at others. The second rule is your humor should never be aimed at someone who is defenseless, a vulnerable minority. Always aim your humor at those who are richer and more powerful than you. For example, to make fun of the slum dweller is not funny. It is merely cruel and insensitive. But to satirize the rich landlord or politician who creates slums is legitimate and indeed performs a much needed social service. It is often said that Indians don't have a sense of humor. If they didn't, they would not be able to survive. Suraiya sticks to these two cardinal principles. The first but of his self deprecatory humor is invariably himself. He portrays himself as a total dunderhead who couldn't get through a normal day without the able and unstinting help of his wife Bunny and of Brindle the street dog who adopted Jug some years ago. Bunny herself says that in her husband's writings she's merely a fictive device. If that really is the case, she's a device that works remarkably well. She's the perfect foil for Jug's zaniness. She represents sense and sensibility in a world sadly lacking in both. Starting with himself, Jug goes on to take potshots at the high and mighty in India and the world, politicians, snobs, bureaucrats, the glitterati, and the nowhere rich. From the wilds of Haryana to the bubbling, melting port of London. In his new book, Juggling Act, a collection of his popular Sunday column in Times of India, Juggler Wayne, Jug spares no punches. He goes straight from the jugular. However, the intention is never to wound, but to cut his targets down to size with his trademark gentle irony. Even that ultimate upstart, death is not spared. So is there nothing so serious that can't be laughed about? You must be joking. So that's Shabana Azmi and her foreword. Now, going through the contents, they are one pages or say a little more than that. So it's one is flat out, second is no joking, then you have upside downside, then pack of beyond, then grunty of quality, then double trouble, then totalitarian recall, then Kerala in a coconut, and also a second part to it, Kerala in a coconut. Then he talks about microwaves, then a house of Mr. Suraiya, then he talks about cosmological, then he talks about seasons gratings. Then he talks about the karmic wheel of VFF. Find out and read what it is. Then you have notes of Nikamma Sun. Then you have Badlands of Bihar. Then you have Curry and Vice. Then you have Beat the Eat. Then he talks about Cast My Lot. Then he talks about Sal Mubarak. Then he talks about Khao Pio. Then he also same to same. Then he talks about did I say something wrong. Then he also talks about what's in a jacuzzi. Then he talks about Jug Geo. Then he talks about beauty of Sarkar. Then also talking terms. Then he talks about WHINE, wine and dine. Then he talks about bongs, take the biscuit, BISKOOT. Then he talks about stitch in time, Then he talks about running on empty. He talks about a small Indian wedding. Talks about breakfast of champions. Then monsoons get lost. Moving mountains. Then he talks about monsters ball. Then the 2 rupee liberal. Then Mercury rising. Then death by numbers. Then he talks about bloody nuisance. And well, I'm going to read a little up from there. So bloody nuisance is on page 91. He writes, recently I caught a cold, sniffles, inflamed sinuses, scratchy throat. No, it wasn't SARS, SARS, just a common cold. Go to the doc, said Bunny. No bloody fear, I said, and meant it because I knew that the first thing he'd do would be to tell me to take a blood test. Collectively, the medical profession today is more bloodthirsty than Dracula, who in comparison seems like an anemic Shakahari, that is a vegetarian. Go to a doctor to ask him anything. Why do I hear a buzzing in my ears every time the doorbell rings? Or why do I see black spots floating in front of my eyes whenever I enter a room full of mosquitoes? And before even handing you his bill for professional services rendered, he'll prescribe a blood test. So he talks about this doctor whose wife asked him if he'd be late home for dinner, and he told her to go get a blood tested. Totally untrue, of course. In fact, he told the whole household to get their blood tested. The visiting jharu pocha lady included. Why this morbid insistence on gore, this corpuscular compulsion? It wasn't always like this. When I was a kid in Calcutta, I felt poorly. My mother would haul me off to Pratap Babu, a GP, general practitioner. Show me your tongue, Pratap Babu would say. I'd oblige, happy to stick my tongue out at a grown-up and be commended for it. Put it back, Pratap Babu would say, and take my pulse. Then would come the stethoscope, the really scientific part. The metal thingy which was placed against your chest would feel cold even on a summer day, which meant your skin was hot and you had fever. The cure for which was a pink mixture made by Pratap Babu's compounder, and which tasted so vile you got yourself well before half the bottle was finished. No fuss, no bother. No buckets of blood, unlike today, when my Mediclaim policy has expired and to renew, which I have to have, what else? A blood test. What's your problem with blood tests? Asked Bunny disingenuously, as though she doesn't know. My problem is the same as hers, or as anyone else related to the Sasha Mossack, the guy who thought agony was ecstasy and invented the term masochism. Don't believe a word they say. All those people who tell you, what? Frightened of a little itsy bitsy needle, which you can't even feel? Hardly. How can you be such a sissy? Easy for them to talk when it's you, not they, who are going to be turned into a human pincushion with someone jabbing what feels like a red hot knitting needle into your veins and sucking out all the gluttonous tomato ketchup inside, which you'd rather not think of. Thanks very much, but let it be their turn, and at the first sight of a white coat with a needle winking behind, holy shit, you're not going to stick that into me. No way, mama. So something like that. I mean, I haven't read the whole thing. You must get the book to read it. So this is how he comes up with. So there are others, others are take a hike, well, I'm home, meeting point, then stamp of identity, then loaded questions. Then he also talks about the karmic Kerala. Then he talks about I was a BPO. They are all very interesting. Then he also has written Sat Sri Akal PMG. Then he talks about the VRs. Then he talks about the Berlin Melody. Then he talks about Pinch This Book. Then he talks about Ulta Pulta India. He also talks about spinal column. Yeah, it's worth the read. You'll enjoy yourself. I mean, just pick out any page, read a little, and smile.